The Taliban now controls 65% of Afghanistan, and analysts predict it could be just a matter of months before the insurgents take over the entire country. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Everything is moving in the wrong direction. That's the assessment of U.S. intelligence as the Taliban retake 9 of 34 provincial capitals in just a matter of days. The United Nations reports more than 1,000 civilians have been killed in the fighting in the last month alone. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani met with leaders in the northern city of Mazar-i-Sharif on Wednesday in a sign of support for pro-government forces. While the Taliban appears emboldened by a U.S. withdrawal, President Joe Biden says he stands by his decision to leave the country by the end of August.
We spent over $1 trillion, over 20 years. We trained and equipped with modern equipment over 300,000 Afghan forces. And Afghan leaders have to come together. We lost death and injury, thousands of American personnel. They've got to fight for themselves, fight for their nation.
For more now on the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Kabul is Victoria Fontan. She's the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies at the American University of Afghanistan. Here in Washington, D.C., Michael Kugelman is the Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center. Ahmad Shah Mohibi is the founder and president of Rise to Peace, a research organization focused on preventing terrorism and extremism. And Omar Samad served as the Afghan ambassador to France and Canada and is a non-resident senior fellow with the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And Ambassador Samad, let me start with you. You know, we've spent a lot of time in the past on this very show talking about Afghanistan, talking about the future there, the peace talks, the situation on the ground, and what happens to the future of the country. Now we have a situation where the Taliban is on the offensive, taking 9 provincial capitals in just a few days. We had this report in U.S. media over the past day telling us, citing U.S. intelligence sources, telling us that the capital, Kabul, could fall within 90 days. What is your assessment of the situation in the country right now?
Well, my assessment is almost the same as we've discussed in the past and on many occasions, saying that the Taliban seem to be in ascendancy. They're emboldened. They are in high spirits. They have a vision for what they want. They have a strategy. They have backing, obviously, within the country as well as from networks outside the country. They have now captured a large chunk of territory and making it posing a very big challenge to the government in Kabul, and also big questions to countries in the region, in the neighborhood, as well as the great powers who are vested in have an interest in Afghanistan. Overall, I think that we are at a fluctuation point, meaning that we either think that this Afghan crisis will be resolved through military means, which in my opinion is the wrong assumption and the wrong goal, because it cannot be resolved militarily. It will devastate Afghanistan if we take that path. Or that we do everything possible to realize what the hurdles, recognize and identify the hurdles along the way, politically get the process moving in the right direction and resolve the issues by making sure that Afghans own their country and also the peace that has to come in order to end this war.
Ambassador, the future of Afghanistan, of course, is tied very closely to the U.S. withdrawal. We look at this intelligence leak in Washington over the past day or so. This was a leak, anonymous leak, to United States media. And I'm wondering, you know, if you are an Afghan soldier or even someone in the Afghanistan government, what kind of message does that send? Doesn't that really hit morale badly in the country if you hear the United States intelligence services saying, well, it could be 30 days, it could be 90 days?
Well, the last time they had an assessment, they said 6 months. And I remember a couple of years ago, the president of Afghanistan, Mr. Ashraf Ghani himself, said that without support, he won't last 6 months. So they may all be right. Things have changed since then. What we are seeing is basically Taliban being in a position where they can actually dictate the terms on the ground to a large extent. It's not because they're much stronger, not at all. It's because the spirit of the Afghan forces has dwindled. They don't really trust and believe anymore, probably, in what they're fighting for. They're fighting on the other side, mostly other Afghans. This has turned into a civil war that we need to make sure that it does not turn into a proxy war, which would be even more devastating. And we need to, again, make sure that we, as I said, identify the hurdles and take the political path. Otherwise, things are going to get worse, unfortunately.
Victoria, you are joining us from Kabul, and our thanks again to you for joining us at what is a very late hour right now in Afghanistan. These, of course, are very anxious times, very uncertain times, very nervous times in Afghanistan right now. What are you seeing and hearing there in Kabul?
Well, the spirit in Kabul is very low. Most of the people I know are looking for a way out of the country. So in addition to the troops' morale being low, the population now is trying to scramble for whatever they can. And there's absolutely no spirit of national unity at this time, and very little trust in the government and in its ability to actually repel some of those Taliban gains in the different provinces. So the morale is low. There's also a lot of apprehension, specifically among women. They feel that they're going to be let down again by both the international community and also their governments. And for those that cannot plan a departure out of Afghanistan, there is a lot of resignation and to a fate that they feel is looming. And so from that sense, I would say that the largest failure of the government is not to have rallied the population behind its cause. Mm-hmm. And this, of course, could be, due to years of perceived corruption and disenfranchisement on many grounds.
Right, Victoria, when you say people are fleeing from Kabul, where are they fleeing to?
Well, those who can afford it have already left the country. Others have been made aware of the different special immigration visas and priority number 2 categorization, and all right now are trying to find a way out. Even if they worked for us for 1 month, they're asking, oh, please, can you put me on the list, etc. And those are really difficult times to see. Most of the people we trained, we worked with, and that were really the future of the country in terms of its administration, in terms of its public services, in terms of industry even. It's disheartening to see them considering just fleeing and not fighting for their country.
Victoria, the United Nations Special Representative for Afghanistan is warning that without any intervention in the country, it could descend into, quote, a situation so serious that it would have few, if any, parallels in history. Let's listen to what she had to say.
This is now a different kind of war, reminiscent of Syria recently, or Sarajevo in the not-so-distant past. To attack urban areas is to knowingly inflict enormous harm and cause massive civilian casualties. Nonetheless, the threatening of large urban areas appears to be a strategic decision by the Taliban, who have accepted the likely carnage that will ensue.
So, Victoria, that's a pretty dire warning there from the United Nations. I mean, could that happen?
It is already happening in the 9 cities that have been taken. The offensive on Mazar-i-Sharif is happening at this time, and I would say that it's only it's only a matter of days before other cities are being targeted. And so she's absolutely right. And there are so many parallels with Syria, even with Iraq after the withdrawal of US forces. And we know what happened in Iraq. It was the rise of the Islamic State. And it's really alarming to see that we don't learn from our mistakes, and that it's all written on the walls, and somehow the parallels are not being made and the right decisions are not being taken. Air support is definitely incredibly important. Mm-hmm. At the same time, populations are increasingly becoming collateral damage to that air support, and this is further emboldening the Taliban and also validating their narrative. So those are really tricky grounds, and it's quite important to provide the right support and also in forms of diplomacy and in forms of a political settlement.
Ahmad Shah Mohibi, clearly the situation is deteriorating in Afghanistan. The United States says that it will continue to provide air support to Afghan forces until its withdrawal is complete from the country. This is what the Pentagon spokesman John Kirby had to say. Let's listen.
They have a force of over 300,000 soldiers and police. They have a modern Air Force, an Air Force, by the way, which we continue to contribute to and to improve. They have modern weaponry. They have an organizational structure. They have a lot of advantages that the Taliban don't have. Taliban doesn't have an Air Force. Taliban doesn't own airspace. They have a lot of advantages. Now they have to use those advantages. They have to exert that leadership, and it's got to come both from the political and from the military side.
So, Ahmed, listening there to John Kirby, is he effectively saying you're on your own right now?
Absolutely. The United States has given everything to the Afghan security forces, if we look at it in the past 20 years. An army of 360,000 with armored vehicles, Humvees and things, air support. Afghanistan security forces, they have everything. What they didn't have is a strong leadership. And it has been something from every station I've been telling that Afghanistan needs a solid and a strong leadership so they could be able to take down the Taliban. So that is what has been missing in the past, I would say, several years. If we look at it the past 2 years in Afghanistan, the Afghan president started a new program called special retirement, special retirement of Afghan officers and generals. Why, in such a critical condition or situation in Afghanistan, you're retiring your generals, those who have experience in the war? So I think the problem goes back to Afghanistan themselves. It was a dependency theory evolved in Afghanistan post 9/11, where Afghans got so dependent on the United States and international allied forces as from giving to operation to air support. So I think it's time that the Afghan government that needs to put a stronger effort in dictating and leading the war rather than focusing in various ethnic and other issues across Afghanistan. So I think air support is the best thing right now, given that all the different provinces are being attacked. Right. Last night, Faizabad, the Badakhshan, fall into Taliban. I spoke to Jalal Yaftali, the former head of special forces. They survived 18 ambushes to make it to Takhar province. So the air support is a big need. He told me that if we had the air support, we could have resisted more. So they have all the resources they needed. I just don't understand why a lot of these resources and the money are not being properly utilized. I think the Afghan war has been mismanaged from the beginning. Yeah.
Ahmed, you know, you talk about the leadership in the Afghan military. The president has fired the head of the military. In fact, he's been replaced. That only happened over the past 24 hours. And as far as, you know, the Afghan military being equipped by the United States, I mean, these are weapons which would be useful in a conventional war. Are they really useful in the kind of war that we're seeing in Afghanistan, which is essentially a guerrilla asymmetric war?
It is. In a guerrilla warfare, in asymmetric warfare, you need Mujahideen, you need the Northern Alliance, you need the resistance that you know how to fight these people. I think there was a big mistake in the beginning. We DDR and disarmed all of these militants in the past. And the Afghan government tried to build a strong institution, and they failed and they lacked. I think, yes, the weapon is the right, the soldiers are the right people, and the territory, or say the landscape, is really perfect. What is missing in Afghanistan is a leadership. If you look at back the 19 years, the level of the $1 trillion U.S. spent, all the air supports that we have sent, the equipment, the salaries, the new administrations, it was mismanaged by the Afghans. I think it's just the strong leadership needs to properly manage the war and making sure. And look at, for example, in a lot of different places in Afghanistan, soldiers did not get bullets, ammunition on time so they could fight the Taliban. Their M16s, M4s, and all T-49s, all of them working perfectly. What is missing is a proper, I would say, a lack of communication and management and leadership. So you have to support your soldiers so they could fight for you. Otherwise, the Taliban will start taking over and over. I think one of the other biggest reasons right now what's happening is that let's stop assuming that the Taliban are going to win.
Yeah.
The Taliban will not be able to take over Kabul in 90 days. That's the wrong assumption. And I think the other speculation was that the Afghanistan war is not winnable militarily, and that was a wrong also, because if you look at the past 19 years, yes, the strategy was wrong, the operation was wrong, but Afghanistan in 2001, the Taliban were all swept out. So there has to be changes in policy and programs, otherwise Afghanistan will suffer more and more. And also, if you put it that way, Pakistan and the neighboring countries, they also have a strong role, both in supporting the Taliban, come to peace process, and also continuing the fight.
Michael Kugelman, President Biden says that he has no regrets over that decision that he took to withdraw United States troops from Afghanistan. This has been a very long war for the United States, the longest war, in fact. It's lasted almost 20 years, more than 20 years. I mean, would it be fair to say right now, looking at the situation on the ground right now, that this has been a failure, a colossal failure, or has something been achieved?
Well, certainly you could point to the gains in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, particularly in terms of human development and society, in terms of so many more women in school, so many more women occupying public roles, more involved in the labor economy. Clearly these are gains. But indeed, if you look at the situation on the ground now, it's really hard to be optimistic at all. And I would argue that the U.S. achieved its major goals very early on in the war, when it of course entered in October 2001 to knock out the Al-Qaeda sanctuaries, which it did fairly quickly, and then also to remove Al-Qaeda's Taliban host from power, which was also done very quickly. And so I think that we've seen what I would describe as a long period of extended mission creep on steroids, perhaps, where it was just very difficult for successive U.S. governments to articulate a clear strategy for why they were still in the country. And it became a situation of trying to put enough pressure on the Taliban that it would be willing to come into talks and negotiate some type of settlement with the Afghan government. And this is why you had the U.S. Troop surge, where we had at one point about 150,000 NATO troops altogether in 2011, 2012. But that clearly didn't work. Yeah. And we see where we've ended up at this point. The war, here in the U.S., the war is either unpopular or unknown. Many Americans haven't even known that the U.S. still had a troop presence there. Yeah. And so I think that for many in the U.S., there's a recognition that it's time to go. But certainly, it's a very political decision. There's a lot of partisan divides as to whether it was the right thing to do or not. And the more and more we see how things worsen in Afghanistan, the more pressure there will be on the Biden administration for making this move that it did.
Michael, as you say, very hard to be optimistic, but what do you make of Ahmad Shah Mohibi's point that this war is still winnable, that the Taliban can be resisted with the right kind of leadership in Kabul?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I do not agree with these assessments that in 30 days or 6 months that the government will fall in Afghanistan. If you look at how the Taliban has been performing on the battlefield, you see one or two things, two different things. One, you see cases of the Taliban essentially taking over areas where you really don't have much resistance or much of a troop presence at all. They've been able to take areas without much fighting at all. And on the other hand, they've been involved, and in other cases, they've been involved in very heavy fighting with the Afghan security forces. So I think that the issue here is in cases where the Taliban has been able to very easily take over spaces, it's because of the issues that were discussed earlier by the other guests. Morale problems, and lack of a desire to fight, bad leadership, and all of that. We can see what Afghan forces are able to do in the areas of the country where they're willing to fight. Herat, for example, has been a place where there's been a lot of resistance, not just from Afghan soldiers, but from other anti-Taliban factions. So that suggests that there is hope. And indeed, I agree that if you can get better leadership, if you could restore morale in the security forces, then all would not be lost. Certainly, you're not going to defeat the Taliban militarily, but hopefully you could have Afghan forces regain momentum and try to put the Taliban on the defensive in some way so that you can create a more conducive environment, potentially for future negotiations.
Right. Ambassador Omar Samad, the United States mediator, the diplomat Zalmay Khalilzad, is still mediating talks in Doha, in Qatar right now, between the two sides. But media reports tell us that Afghan mediators actually don't have much confidence in Zalmay Khalilzad. In fact, they say he doesn't have much credibility. What are the chances, even at this stage, of a negotiated solution?
Well, I'll leave the partisan politics aside because it's very hurtful. People who say those things need to really know the facts. I'm not defending or accusing anyone, but also I just want to make two quick points. Iraq is not Afghanistan, and the Taliban are not ISIS. Yes, there are some bad guys around and some bad Taliban as well who have done a lot of bad things. But Afghanistan's case is very different, and I think that what is happening on the ground right now and how the ANDSF is behaving and how local communities are actually playing the mediation role in most cases. And the other point I want to make is that the resistance to the Taliban, yes, can be shored up. There is some resistance, but I don't think that the situation can easily be changed. The momentum is too great from the Taliban side. It's too late a little bit. 20 years was a long time. It's more than $2 trillion actually that was spent on the Afghan mission, and tens of thousands who have died, including 3,000 Westerners. And so it's very late in the game to think that you can change this. And the best you can do is create a stalemate that would lead to negotiations. But now the Taliban are asking for President Ghani to step down. So their condition now is, and going to Doha to your question, is that they're claiming they still are in favor of negotiations and a settlement, a political settlement. They are pushing on the military front, of course. Are they going to stop around the cities or going to besiege the cities and use that as leverage in political talks? Has to be seen in the next few days. But they have now something concrete on the table, which they didn't have before, which is the removal or the stepping down of President Ghani, which would then open the door for a power-sharing transitional arrangement in Afghanistan. This is something that diplomats have to grapple with. This is something that Afghans have to grapple with. At the same time, we have to make demands of the Taliban. We need to make sure that the Taliban, with it, can bring about some level of reduction in violence and then maybe a ceasefire. If they can do that, then this is something that has to be looked into.
Victoria, as Michael Kugelman told us just a moment ago, it's not all been in vain over the past 20 years. There have been some gains for civil society, human gains in the country, especially for women in the country. But now, I mean, we see women occupying professional positions, girls are going to school. No doubt you have women going to university where you are right now. Is that in any danger right now?
Well, they feel they're in danger, and that definitely is. The female faculty of my university has been threatened already, has received threats. A female student was beaten in the streets of Kabul a few days ago because her identity was revealed. So from that perspective, the threat is definitely already there. In some provinces, schools have closed already. And there is, again, that feeling amongst the female population that they are being let down, and that if there should be a power-sharing agreement, their position within society is going to be diminished to lower positions, to employment that is definitely not. That is definitely beneath their training and beneath their capabilities. And so they fear that they're going to be vanishing from social life, from political life, and that there is going to be no way out of that. So from that perspective, every day I'm hearing from my female students definitely worried and hoping that they will have a space in this new Afghanistan that could be established if there was a political settlement.
Ahmad Shah Muhibi, very briefly, I want to get your view on the negotiations that are taking place. There are 4 women in the Afghan negotiating team. Here is one of them, FAWZIA KOOFI, talking about her frustration dealing with the Taliban. Let's listen.
We have been asking for a political settlement, and I think the Taliban really need to demonstrate some sincerity and faith in this process. People do not trust this process anymore, and they're right, because they think that why are they being killed to this massive extent, women and children, civilians, innocent people, if the talks were real. So the expectation is that Taliban actually show some real, you know, commitment to this process by agreeing to a ceasefire. I talk on a daily basis with hundreds of people from across Afghanistan. I meet them, and I see there is a great level of disappointment and feeling betrayal by what's happening in Afghanistan, especially by international community.
Ahmed, very briefly, if you can, please. I mean, it seems the Taliban are negotiating in bad faith here. I mean, they're just sort of waiting to run the clock out and then take over militarily.
And a Taliban without violence or nothing. So negotiations for the Taliban are to blast their demands, and that's what they have been doing the past one year since the U.S.-Taliban talks. So I think the Taliban commitment to peace talks is for the Afghan security forces and international forces to hit them hard in the battlefield, so they could come to negotiating table and listen to some of the demands of the Afghan government on the other side. Otherwise, you're dealing with insurgency. It's really hard for them to stop violence, because without violence, they have nothing.
Okay, Michael Kugelman, very quickly, a former Canadian ambassador to Afghanistan, Christopher Alexander, he says there is still a likelihood of a negotiated solution to this, but the road to that lies through Pakistan. And we know that Pakistan gives sanctuary to the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, and that it holds the key to that kind of solution. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly one can't deny the critical role of Pakistan just because it has had a long-standing relationship with the Taliban. It was one of only 3 countries to recognize the Taliban regime in the 1990s, and indeed it has provided sanctuary to the group's leadership. So it definitely has more leverage over the Taliban than any other regional player. But, you know, Pakistan has tried to pressure the Taliban to reduce violence and to get the Taliban to do other things, and clearly it hasn't worked. And unfortunately, the Taliban has such an upper hand and has so much leverage because it knows it's doing well in the battlefield and it knows that U.S. troops are leaving, that it really doesn't have an incentive to listen to anyone, including its patron. So I think this is really the unfortunate state of play right now.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.